Hello, my name is Anders Knudby. I'm an associate professor at the University of Ottawa, and I also run a small company called Liquid Geomatics. Together with some colleagues, I've developed a fully automated workflow for mapping water depth, also known as bathymetry, with satellite images. This workflow takes in all the best Sentinel-2 and Landsat 8 images, masks out things like land, clouds, ice, boats, etc., and then inverts a radiative transfer model to estimate per pixel water depth in each image. It then corrects for tides and merges the information from all images of the area into one bathymetry estimate. All the user has to do is specify the area that he or she wants to map. The example shown here is from Lizard Island in Australia. In the initial development of this workflow, we tested it on 5 sites, ranging from the Arctic to the tropics. Between then and now, I've run it in a few more places, like further north in Canada and in the murkier waters of the St. Lawrence River. Because the workflow is fully automated, adding additional sites and enlarging existing ones is not much effort. When we compared the initial satellite-derived estimates to acoustic and LiDAR data, one thing that stumped us is that for our Arctic sites, we see a substantial overestimation of intermediate depths. This is illustrated here in a scatter plot for the Cambridge Bay site. The plot shows depths measured by airborne LiDAR on the x-axis, and our SDB estimates for the same areas on the y-axis. Ideally, we would like each point to fall right on the dotted 1-to-1 line, but as you can see, the actual shape of the points in the plot is quite curved. This is consistent between our 2 Arctic sites, but we don't see the same thing at lower latitudes, or at least not to the same degree. This is illustrated here for Lizard Island. Now, a sample of 5 sites is small, but the consistent difference with latitude suggested to us that it could be related to the atmospheric correction. At higher latitudes, the sun is lower in the horizon and there's more atmosphere for the light to travel through, which will cause a magnification of any problem associated with the atmospheric correction. So we implemented several quite clever and theoretically sound modifications to the atmospheric correction. Unfortunately, none of that made any real difference in these plots. However, the other thing we tried was to optimize the vicarious gain of 2 of the most important sensor bands for satellite-derived bathymetry. The precision with which the sensors we work with measure the intensity of the reflected sunlight is estimated at around 2 to 3%. And it turns out that if we assume that the calibration of one of the bands is off by about that amount, and we then correct for it, then we get results that indeed fall very close to the 1-to-1 line, until the water gets too deep and the seafloor is no longer visible, which at these 2 sites happens around 15 meters. The fact that this correction works doesn't necessarily mean that the sensor calibration is actually the real problem, but from a practical perspective, the correction works to generate better results. So while we try to investigate the sensor calibration issue more, this correction is part of the standard workflow. So what can we do with this workflow? Here's an example from the Astronomical Society Islands in northern Canada, where a research vessel ran aground on an underwater rock in August 2018. That rock, highlighted here in the red circle, is about 200 meters long. It is visible in some satellite images, but not in others, and it was not shown on nautical charts at the time. The workflow, combining information from all images, is able to detect it and clearly identify the area as shallow. In fact, the workflow also finds several other underwater rocks, highlighted here in yellow circles. These are still not shown on nautical charts. Here's another example from the west coast of Hudson's Bay between Whale Cove and Rankin Inlet, where the satellite imagery shows many underwater rocks and large, shallow areas. These are all clearly identified in the bathymetry product, and I've shown them individually here with red outlines. It's important to note that this workflow only works when the seafloor is visible from space. When it's too deep or the water is too murky, this approach to mapping bathymetry will not work. However, the workflow can be applied in many areas around the world to map water depth and improve safety of navigation, and it can be employed entirely in the absence of other data sources.